Hey, this is Kristen Tschida, and we're on chapter 13. So day 13 of Discovering Exodus, our 40-day journey. And what we're going to focus on today in chapter 13 is the word just to remember. And I don't even know if the word is in chapter 13, but that is the word that just comes over and over in my spirit as I read through it. So I want to take a look at just the beginning, the first couple verses of chapter 13, where it says, "The Lord said to Moses, 'Consecrate to me every firstborn male. The first offspring of every womb among the Israelites belongs to me, whether human or animal.' Then Moses said to the people, 'Commemorate this day.'" This is the day that they are being brought out of Egypt. "Commemorate this day, the day you came out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, because the Lord brought you out of it with a mighty hand." Okay, so he's saying commemorate, which means remember. Then there's Moses says this observance in verse 9 will be for you like a sign on your hand and a reminder on your forehead that this law of the Lord is to be on your lips. For the Lord brought you out of Egypt with his mighty hand. You can see that little phrase over and over just through chapter 13. Then in verse 14, it says, "In days to come, when your son asks you, 'What does this mean?' say to him, 'With a mighty hand, the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery.'" All right, so I want to focus on this word remember. And what we need, and I feel like this chapter 13 is kind of hinting to it also in verse 14, "In days to come when your son asks you." We have to have a vision that is beyond ourselves, a vision that's beyond our immediate family. Greg and I have 3 kids, so we have to think bigger than our immediate family. Right now we have 2 grandbabies we know more on the way. We want many arrows in the quiver. So as we're anticipating those little ones that are going to be born. So right now we have Silas and Weston, but it's bigger than that. We're thinking long. We're thinking generationally. We're thinking 100-year vision. So as we come today to this time, what I'm going to do is just kind of bring forth some questions I really want you to ponder, to take before the Lord, and to start thinking about what are those things of inheritance, not just material inheritance, that you want to pass down through the generations to come. And it's really important that we talk about it, because we may think by our language or by our just what we do that they're going to catch it, but we have to be very intentional to share why we do the things we do, the faithfulness of God. I want to give you one little story on this material inheritance. So my father passed away in March, and so my sister and I have been helping my mom. She's going to move, so we're just helping her kind of sort through what are the things that are important to her to keep for her house, all the stuff, and what can she let go of. And of course, it's all really sad and blah, all that. But she has a dining room table and a hutch that's beautiful. She got from Ethan Allen like 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago. And she spent a fortune on it, like as she tells us over and over, to remind us of how important it is to her. But she spent like $8,000 on this dining room table and this beautiful hutch like 20 or 25 years ago. So we're saying to her, "Mom, your dining room table's beautiful, the hutch is beautiful, but goodness sake, that's really a huge thing to take with you to the condo." She's going to really downsize where you're going. And she's been talking about for the last several months. And so finally I went up in August and I said, "Hey, tell me what that's about. Like, why is that so important to you?" And she shared with me, for the first time ever in my 50 few years, that she bought that beautiful dining room table and the hutch with money that she got after her two aunts had passed away. And so, and their names were Aunt Ruth and Naomi. And they were single women who never got married. Yes, very biblical heritage I have. And, but they passed away. It's a beautiful story, but they passed away shortly together. Anyway, my mom received some money as an inheritance from her. So all of a sudden, so to her, that table and hutch represent all the time that she had the memories of being with Aunt Ruth and Naomi, but also that's her inheritance from them. So it was like, oh, well, why didn't you tell me that? Like, I don't know, even when we were growing up. How cool is that she has that from her two aunts? All that to say, we, in our walking out our relationship with the Lord and all of his faithfulness to us, we may think our kids just get it because we look different than the world. We have a history with God, yes, but they don't know specifics. And it's really important that we begin to share the inheritance that we have, what God has done for us. So I want you to be thinking, and if you're not married without kids yet, or if you're married, don't have children yet, I want you to start beginning to think long, think generationally, think through what is to come. And I have a couple questions. I'm looking at my notes again in my journal. Here, before we go there, hang on. I want to go flip ahead to the book of Judges. So we have the Israelites right here, blah, blah, blah. And Moses is saying, in the days to come when your son asks. All right, here is what happens in Judges chapter 2. I'm going to read Judges chapter 2, verse 6 through 10. So now they've gone through the promised land. Joshua's led them. They followed God through the times and seasons of Joshua and the elders. And it said, verse 6, after Joshua had dismissed the Israelites, they went to take possession of the land, each to their own inheritance. The people served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him and who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel. Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110, and they buried him in the land of his inheritance. After that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who neither knew the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Okay, you just kind of go, I wrote in my Bible, how can that be? What? So here, they had somehow not passed on, either in language, in being very specific about what God had done. And whether they thought they would just figure it out or they would just know, there's another generation who grew up, who neither knew the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. So let that be for us a caution that we do not want a generation to grow up in our lineage, in our heritage, in our generational line that doesn't know the Lord nor what he has done for your family, the Tschida family. I know my inheritance from my parents. I've got a great inheritance of faith from my parents. They both have an inheritance from their parents of faith. Both came over from, where was it? Sweden, Norway, and established, I just kicked the table, established their young families here in America. So there's a faith history that I know goes back like 3 generations on both my parents' side, my mom and my dad. So I realize how blessed I am. But we have to be intentional, deliberate to share about what God has done for your family. So my grandparents, great-grandparents had great-great-great-grandparents they were thinking long. They had a 100-year vision. We want to have that same thing. Capture the heart of what God is saying here, what Moses is even telling the people. When your son asks. So here's the few things I want you to do in your time with the Lord today. What do you need to remember? What has the Lord done? I was just walking kind of around my house thinking about, it'd be really fun to do actually a timeline. So from kind of where I start and then where Greg and I meet, and we just have like a timeline of God's faithfulness to each of us individually, and then how we've seen God work in our marriage and our family, and really hit like just the big major things that we've seen God do. I mean, we understand he does miracles every single day for us, and he's done amazing. Great is his faithfulness. His mercies are new every morning. but to kind of hit those big points so that those would be things that would be able to be passed down to the generations and the generations and the generations to come from our line. So what do you need to remember? What has the Lord done? How has he been faithful to you? And even in verse 14 in Exodus 13, in the days to come when your son asks, what does this mean? You can say to him, with a mighty hand, the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. What are the things God's done for you that you can relay to your sons and your daughters and the generations to come? And number 2, how can you tell of God's faithfulness and his presence in your family's life? What are some creative ways that you can even capture that? And I have one more story I'm going to share on this. One of the gals that used to do Bible study with me when I was teaching, every year her family, so her kids were all married, and they had, Ellie was her name, that's her name, had grandkids. And they did, at the end of the year, everyone sent in throughout the year in those individual families and how they had seen God operate in miraculous ways throughout that year. And they just shared several stories. And then one of the daughters of Ellie collected all of those, and she put them together in a little book. So they have, every year, they've got this faith history of their family that they will literally be able to pass those down for the generations to come, to see what God has done in his faithfulness to their family, their extended family. And I just thought that's just the coolest little thing. So I wanted to share that with you. Maybe that's something that you want to start doing. I have several journals, and I've got kind of a faith history journal. I've got journals now for Silas and Weston, and I'll start that with my next little ones as we have more grandchildren, so that they understand the things that we see in them, the things that I'm praying for them, what God says about them. And then we have this faith history of all the testimonies that we've seen God do in our family. But I really want to do my timeline thing, so I may be working on that. And then third, how can you help the next generation? How can you help them remember? What are some things that you can do to help instill that? And lastly, before we go, I just want to read a sad account. Oh, and I didn't put a marker in my Bible. It's in 2 Kings, and it is of Hezekiah. And Hezekiah was a king, and he didn't think long. He did not have a 100-year vision. He just had really a vision all about himself. So in 2 Kings 20, there comes a time when Hezekiah really invites the enemy to come on in, and he's kind of parading him around his palace. He shows them all the treasures of the kingdom and where all the treasures are. And he's, pumped himself up. He's pretty proudful. And Isaiah comes to him and says, where did those men come from? And what did they say? And he replies, they came from a distant land. They came from Babylon. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? We know what's going to happen because Babylon comes and takes captive of Israel. And they saw everything in my palace. There's nothing among my treasures I didn't show him. He's bragging before the prophet Isaiah. And Isaiah said to him, hear the word of the Lord. The time will surely come when everything in your palace and all that your predecessors have stored up until this day will be carried off to Babylon. Nothing will be left. All your predecessors had gathered. So there's this generational thing that's happening, and Hezekiah misses it. Some of your descendants, okay, so that's not just your sons, your daughters, or your grandkids. It's your descendants, your own flesh and blood, who will be born to you, will be taken away, and they will become eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. And Hezekiah says this, the word of the Lord you've spoken is good. And then he thought, but will there not be peace and security in my lifetime? So all he thought about was himself. He was focused on the immediate. He was focused on the present. We have so much more to be living for than just focused on the here and now. And I think Exodus 13 is just a reminder that we need to think long, we need to think generationally, and we need to think about the inheritance that we've received and the inheritance that we want to pass on, to get a vision that's bigger than ourselves. So when our sons ask, when our daughters ask, we have a response. And here's another thing about that. The only I wrote down in my journal, well, the only reason they would ask why is because they actually see us doing something. So we need to be really proactive about what God's doing. How do we preserve even his faithfulness in our own life? So we will see you in Exodus 14. I know I've gone a little long today, but well, we're thinking long, so there you go. All right, so take some of those questions to the Lord. Those will be in the handout. Remember, KristenTschida.com. Under it's like resources and then devotional tab. On that devotional tab are all the handouts for every single chapter. All right, I'll see you in Exodus 14.